What do you want to talk about today, Ayinde?
And today I've been thinking about Newsday and 32 years in the business, and now they're no more. And I'm wondering if in today's context of AI and social media, if traditional media is really and truly dead. What are you going to talk about today?
All right, today I want to talk a little bit about personal branding and CEOs. And the question I want to ask is, should CEOs actively build their personal brand with content? It's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and we do content for CEOs. So I think it's a good discussion that we could have and get into that a little bit.
Okay, great. Let's get into it.
The first thing I want to bring up is that since content has become very accessible to people, and when I say content has always been accessible, but since the tools have become easier to access, and the rise of the influencer, the rise of personal branding, one of the big questions that has always been asked is whether or not a CEO should take time to create personal content. So I was very curious about what the lay of the land is in Trinidad and Tobago for CEOs creating content. And so what I decided to do is just do some cursory research on that. And I looked at some of the most profitable companies in Trinidad and Tobago. Has to be local, can't be foreign, has to be local. And I came up with 3 of them. Actually, I came up with 4, but I'm only going to use 3 today. The first one was NGC, which is the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago. The second one was Angostura. Of course, everybody knows Angostura because of Angostura bitters, quite popular, makes a lot of alcoholic drinks, etc. And the third one was the Massey Group, so Massey. So formerly Neil and Massey, and what else? It was Neil and Massey, and they had a ton of the different subsidiaries, and they basically pulled everything into one group and just went under the name Massey. So I looked at those 3 different companies, and I looked at the CEOs of those companies to see whether or not they have been creating content, because if their companies are so profitable, do they need to create content? Now, I understand this is not a mangoes to mangoes comparison. If you were out of the Caribbean, they'd say apples to apples. This is not a mangoes to mangoes comparison. Right. And it's just some cursory things to help fuel the thought around whether CEOs should actively be creating content. But what are your thoughts on that before I get into the details?
Well, it's interesting the type of industries that you talk about, and I think that's one of the thoughts that will come to mind. First of all, what's your context that you're operating inside of? Because I think the context in which you find yourself as a CEO and in which your company is operating inside, and context is wide. So context is going to include who your competitors are, what your industry is, what the norms are, what the expectations are, what do you need to break through if you need to communicate a particular message. And so that thought comes to mind. Does it make sense? Does it fit inside of the context? Mm-hmm. But also, I don't want to throw up a wall and say, well, I'm not in a context that requires a CEO to make content, because you might default to thinking about one kind of content. And you might say, well, no, I am CEO of First Citizens Bank. I don't need to make that kind of content. That's for somebody who has a small business.
Right.
But you're only thinking about one kind of content. And I think in today's world, a lot of the content that a CEO has to create 30 years ago might have been called public relations or PR or something thereof. So just initial thoughts on it. I feel like there's room for it, but I also feel like you have to be careful not to say this is the only type of content that there is. Right. And then because you run the risk of either creating content that doesn't make sense for your business or avoiding creating content because you don't understand how far you can actually go and you just put a limit on it.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the way in which we thought about it previously, and I would say decades ago, was that whole PR push where you come, you shake someone's hands, you probably go out into the community, you meet with people, you do different things that was to show how relatable your company is and to get people to like your company, especially if you had a big company. That was a lot of what people did. And obviously, if something went wrong, you have your PR for crisis, you have your crisis management, you have all that thing that goes along with it. But I think what I am talking about when I talk about CEOs making content is what you're referring to, which is now, should CEOs be a voice directly to people on behalf of their business and talk about things that they feel are important, or even talk about what their company is doing directly to people, so that they don't have a team as an intermediary between them and the audience, but they can come on, and if they want to do a live stream, if they want to create a blog post, if they want to do a video, should they do that? So in looking at that, I was looking at these three highly successful companies, profitable companies in Trinidad and Tobago. Mm-hmm. So let's look at the first one, which I was thinking about. I'm not going to put it up on the screen. I'm just going to talk about it, right? So first one I want to look at is the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited, and the Vice President of Legal Corporate Affairs, and well, he's actually the president now, is Edmund Subrian. I don't know if you've heard of him before. Have you heard of him before? No. No? Okay, good. So and let me just say, I looked at these CEOs only on LinkedIn, because I'm going to work with the assumption that if you have to create content as a business owner at that scale, mm-hmm. you're probably not going to do it on Instagram or on TikTok. You're probably going to do it where other businesses are. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they'll create it on LinkedIn. So for Mr. Subrian, he basically has zero content on LinkedIn. He only has 29 followers. He has zero content on LinkedIn. Well, not zero content. He has 4 pieces of interactions, which are just 4 comments. And all of them are saying congrats to someone else, like congrats on this or congrats on that. Interestingly, he has a comment as recently as 4 days ago, but as only as far back as 1 year ago. So he's basically averaging 1 comment a quarter on LinkedIn. And so he really is not making any content there. But obviously, National Gas Company, it's government funded, and it's one of the revenue generating companies in Trinidad and Tobago. The second company I looked at was, of course, as I mentioned before, Angostura. And Angostura is also an interesting company, and it has a board. But I am looking at the CEO in particular. The CEO of Angostura right now, the acting CEO, is Ian Forbes. Now, Ian Forbes is an interesting person. He has been in the role of CEO for the last 6 months or so. I think he was put in on October 1st, 2025 to lead the company. But he has been with the company for a while, since 2017, in operations and things of that nature, right? On LinkedIn, he has zero, like a ducat, no recent posts, and he has 29 connections. So he's not actively on LinkedIn as social media, so he has no content whatsoever. Now, it doesn't mean that he hasn't appeared on in content for the company, but he just hasn't been doing anything for himself on his personal profile on what I would deem as the appropriate channel for people who are business leaders, which is LinkedIn. So he doesn't have any content either. And then the last person I want to bring up is James McCletchie. Now, James McCletchie, Mr. McCletchie, he is the CEO of Massey Group, right? And we all know Massey Group. Massey is all over Trinidad and Tobago, is all over the Caribbean. And he has been at Massey Group for a while as well. He's currently Chief Executive Officer there. Interestingly, he is the only person of those 3 who is doing stuff other than his role as CEO. And so he actually was a speaker at Tech Beach, Miami. Was it Tech Beach, Miami? I think it's Tech Beach, Miami. He was a speaker there. Tech Beach Retreat in 2004. That's where he was at. And he is a little bit more active, posting every few months. And he only really became very active on LinkedIn about a year ago. At the time that he became, around the time he became the CEO, or it was the CFO first, and then he became the CEO. So he is somewhat out there doing stuff with it and has been building a name for himself apart from just doing the business stuff, but building his name as a thought leader and as an authority.
So why do you think he stands out among his peers? Is it his industry? Is it personal? And I know you have to make some assumptions here because you haven't really spoken to him, but what assumptions would you make that would cause one CEO to say, yes, I need to be more active in creating content and doing non-CEOs? Well, I shouldn't say non-CEO, but what CEOs usually don't consider part of their job, compared to his two peers who decided, oh, we don't need to create anything, or we haven't had the time to create anything.
I've been wondering that. I've been wondering about what causes certain leaders to say, I do have the time. No, that's the normal thing, right? That is the normal response when you tell a CEO or a managing director they should create content. The normal response is, I do have the time, right? But you and I both know that we create time for what is important. So it's just that they don't see it as necessary or important. We know that. I think I'm going to assume, I don't know him, I don't know his mindset, but he was invited to that tech beach and he went and he spoke about data that Massey is using to serve the customers. And he basically said they collected all of this data from people shopping and what they're doing with it. So he took obviously a tech angle to the stuff that he's sharing. But I think that for him, he stands out because he recognizes that in order for him to, or in order for the company to be seen in a particular way, he has to have a voice as an authority in certain things. And I think before, was it last week when we were talking, and you mentioned that maybe content is the new PR. I can't remember.
Yeah, might have been in that discussion.
Yeah. Content is being the new PR, and so he's grabbing that concept, I think, and using it as part of how he's building the brand and the image of Massey. Because if you have a CEO who comes across as not just this kind of, and let me kind of say as a stuffy, I don't know how else to describe it, as like an untouchable, like somebody who's far off, but they come across as somebody who is in the know, they're current, they're up with technology, they're up with the trends, and not just in their particular industry, but in the way they communicate with the world. I think it makes the company more credible. Right. It makes the company seem closer and more relatable, especially if the CEO has a way that they deliver the thing, or they have a way that they talk about the issues surrounding that. And in his case, he's using a lot of data references when he talks about Massey, which I think is a big win for him.
It's interesting that you mentioned credibility and relatability, because one of the thoughts I was having is that in today's world, something that's lacking a lot is trust. A lot of consumers don't necessarily trust corporations. They don't necessarily trust businesses as much as they used to. And it's much more difficult for a brand to build a relationship today because of that lack of trust. Yeah. But when you have a CEO creating content, or you have a CEO who is, so to speak, meeting the people and is in the space where the people are, it's much easier to begin to build trust and therefore to build relationship. And I think that is going to prove to be one of the strategies that's going to allow other companies on the whole to build better relationships with their target audience and with their clients long term. And having that come from the CEO drives, I think, the culture of the entire organization. And it actually makes anything that the company says afterwards much more believable. So one of the things that you get from a CEO doing content or CEO being public is a certain level of just straight up believability, because he's willing to assign and attach his face to whatever statement is coming out. I think of two examples in not recent history, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I don't want to mention them, they're kind of negative, but where I think about them, because the thought I was having is that the CEO should have appeared on television.
Right.
Not only that, the CEO should have put out a video message on social media, because what happened is that in the gap of hearing somebody in authority speak, people started creating realities. And you know how social media is. The thing reached to levels that you wouldn't believe. And so what happens when there's a gap left, people just fill it with all kinds of stuff. True or not, correct or not, right or not, they fill it with stuff. But if somebody like the CEO shows up and does a video message, puts it out on LinkedIn, does a video message, puts it out on social media, because is necessary, is needed, I think that is going to say, okay, I can put a little more trust in this because there's a person, there's an actual human behind it. And I think that is important for companies long term. If they are to build successful brands, they have to build brands that people can trust. And I think using CEOs seeing themselves as bastions of that brand and as the first communicator in chief for that brand, seeing themselves as that, I think is important.
Yeah, I agree with that so much. I agree with that so much. There is a crisis of trust right now, and it's increasing. It's getting worse. And it's not helped by, and we talked about this in the last episode, it's not helped by AI. It's not helped by people being able to create almost anything they want. But really and truly, that is false. It's not really real. And so I like the whole idea of a CEO being able to directly talk to the people. Like, before you would have to set up a whole press conference, before you would have to call in the news,
right,
and you would have to book some spot. You would have to have you could just have your own press conference if you want. You could just jump on your social media or platform that you want, and you could talk about things and be real about it. And obviously that involves some level of risk if you were to do that in the midst of a crisis. But I mean, generally, if you are somebody who has viewpoints, you have an opinion, and those opinions are in alignment with what your brand wants to become or the vision for your brand, then you should be able to just talk to people about it. You should be able to do that. And that does help build trust tremendously. And the last thing I'll say about that is that, like for us, when we work with CEOs, a big part of how we deal with that is that we tell them, well, basically, what do you want to express? What do you want to say? And we help them bring that message out to talk to the people directly. CEOs are different. Some would want to focus more on the type of work that they do. Some would want to focus on building their own thought leadership and their own authority. And we generally tend to facilitate that, where we help people get their voice out in that way. But I think it's important, regardless of the size of your company, that the leaders say something. Leaders can't be hidden like they used to before. Like, you don't even know who's the CEO or the managing director of this company. You never hear them talk. There's some mysterious person behind a curtain. I think the days of that is done. And for companies to be trusted, for brands to be trusted, you're definitely going to have people coming out and saying things directly to the people and building their brand with content. All right. So what are you going to talk about, Ayinde? Let's hear what you have on the table today.
So I've been, as I mentioned earlier, I've been thinking about the death of, and sorry to use the word death for former employees of Newsday, but thinking about the death of Newsday.
For those who don't know, explain what Newsday is.
Yes, sorry. Newsday is one of 3 national newspapers in Trinidad and Tobago. I think most of the time they have been number 3, a very close number 3 at some point. I think sometimes they may have moved into the 2nd place, but years since I've been in advertising, so I am not 100% sure. However, they are the ones that have since closed down out of the 3. And these are traditional publications, national newspapers, and usually part of your holy trinity of advertising, press, radio, TV. And in a market where radio seems to be thriving somewhat, I'm wondering if the death of Newsday is signaling the death knell for the other two in the triumvirate of advertising media. Yeah, so 32 years and it's no longer in business. But from what I've heard, they were kind of declining. I don't think they've used their press in a while. One of the other big newspapers were printing for them. So I'm wondering, how are we, because we've predicted the death of press now for maybe 30 years, and I'm wondering if we are actually now seeing it. Because even if you look internationally, publication circulation is down. Some of the bigger brands are moving to a strategy where they are doing collectibles, so they're kind of compressing issues. So if you did magazines, for example, you might do a winter issue, which is January, February, or December, January, rather than doing 12 issues a year, you're doing 8 issues a year. So there's some contraction taking place there. But on the other hand, I am noticing there is a renewed interest, and this links back to our last week's discussion too. There's renewed interest in retro. So what is happening, while the big publications are contracting in terms of their distribution, you find that there's a lot of small publications popping up and increasing in number. And I'm wondering if there is an opportunity there for businesses. Because people want things that they can hold now. People are going back to their iPods and their CD players and their cassette players, and they want to go to events, and they're looking for that tangibility, because we've moved into a world that's so intangible, and most of our work now is so intangible behind the computer. I think there's a sense that people want to hold on to something. So dying on one side, yes, but is there opportunity arising on the other side where you can become more hyper-local, for example, or more niche, like magazines or newspapers that are more niche? So maybe there's an opportunity to do a national newspaper that is very specific or very niche. And is interesting the direction that media is going into, where people are kind of looking back at some of these, and we have the high tech. So there may be, I feel like, opportunity to explore hybrids and mixes between these things. And the future might be in a hybrid. So it's unfortunate that Newsday had to close down. But I'm wondering what options do other newspapers like The Guardian or The Express, how should they look to the future? What should they be doing in the future?
I remember, well, first of all, when's the last time you bought a newspapers?
It's in the years. It is definitely in the years. My wife just posted a message to a group asking somebody in the community if they have a newspapers. So that's a good question. But yeah, it's been a while.
Right. I remember the day when I stopped buying newspapers. I remember the day. The day when I think it went from $3 to $4, I think, is when I stopped buying newspapers. And I said, I'm not buying this anymore. Because essentially, and this is not to take away from the excellent work that publications have been doing over the years. They have been doing the work. Journalists have very important work. But if you think about news at its core, or newspaper at its core, it was informing the population of recent happenings in different categories, things that they needed to know. And part of the way in which it was doing that is by giving you a physical document so you can read, right? And inside of that physical document, there were all different sorts of sections. There was current news, international news, there was sports, there was a little comic strip that you'd read, there's the classifieds. We haven't used classifieds in so long. I remember I think I posted my first car for sale in the classifieds in the newspapers. There were lots of different sections in the newspapers.
Right.
Basically, the idea of that was to deliver to you the most current form of things happening. The problem with the newspaper is that it's a day late. It's a day late. That's the problem. By the time you print that, I mean, most of the world, most of the nation knows already about the thing because of social media. And another problem you have is that not only just the speed, but the fact that people can now be very targeted in what they want to know, which is a good thing and a bad thing. So they don't have to buy this collection of things and go in a section to pick out what they want to read, right? They could just go and get the exact news that they want. If they're into sports, just subscribe to some sports page or sports TikTok feed or whatever, and then they get the thing immediately, and that was another problem with it, is that people can now just be very targeted in what they want. And so basically, if I'm not interested in not that I am not, people, let's take this as for what I'm going to say. If I'm not interested in a women's magazine, then I don't have to buy newspapers to get a women's magazine. How many times, and there's been times when I have bought newspapers specifically to get one article, specifically to get one thing, and you just don't need to do that anymore, and then again, people not even, and I don't know if this is hyperbolic to say this, but people just don't read as much. They just don't read as much like traditionally. I don't know if that's a wrong thing to say or a good or a bad thing to say, So I think newspapers have their own challenges, and I think it's never going to be the same. But if the model changes, and I may have some suggestions as to what could happen, then they may be able to continue to live on in a different kind of form while keeping the same name, newspapers.
Right. I think traditional print has one thing over new media that I'm not sure if newspapers in Trinidad and Tobago and publications in Trinidad and Tobago have leveraged enough, which is a high level of trust and institutional authority. That's one thing new media was always struggle with. So we have a number of news reporters, and I have to do that in inverted commas, on different social media platforms, TikTok, Twitter, X, etc. The problem with those outlets is there's a variability in trust. Yeah. So it's kind of, well, one, you don't know the person, but if you spend time, you could also get to know the person. But then there's another issue of bot-created content. And so there's a low level of trust. And I feel like if traditional print would use their one asset, which is high levels of trust and institutional authority, and leverage that to create new products and new ways of communicating and new ways of producing journalism. Some of it video-based. Some of it video-based. I think there's opportunity for print to go into video because of digital. And I feel like they're not using that enough. The other thing that comes to mind is that whether or not print is dying always comes back. Once you're talking marketing, you're talking who your target audience is. You have to consider who your target audience is. So for most of us, my age, your age, we might say print is dead. We haven't bought a newspaper in years that we can't count. And you mentioned $4. I don't even remember that it went to $4. So that's telling how long.
Sunday newspaper is $5. I bought one yesterday for my mother-in-law. She buys it every Sunday. Right.
And this is coming from somebody who, growing up, I read newspapers every single day. Every day we bought newspapers. We used to buy 2 newspapers. Back then, you used to have evening news. So we used to get the papers in the morning and then pick up evening news in the afternoon. And we would read all those newspapers. And I know we don't buy them now, but we are not the only people in the economy. And there are target groups that do use newspapers on a regular basis, do read newspapers still on a regular basis. And if you find yourself as a business talking to those people, then it's still an option. What you probably have as a business now is more leverage more bargaining power, because these publications are not the powerhouses they used to be to demand the prices that they would traditionally demand for advertising and press. So you have a little more flexibility, but there are still audiences that you can only reach in a real way through traditional press. Yeah. So target audience is important. Who you're talking to. So whether or not this medium is going to die depends on if people are there, because marketers always have to go where the people are.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. And to be honest, I hadn't thought about it in terms of target audience because, well, first of all, that institutional authority, that trusting is still, that's real. That's like real. I remember when I was interviewing Julian Rogers and he was talking about the difference between journalists and these social media people. And he kind of referred to generalized people on social media, that they don't have the same responsibility that a journalist has to verify information, to make sure that the thing is real. They can't just come and say anything they want. And the people who are on social media, a lot of them are contributing to the destruction of trust, because you can't really trust anything anybody says. Sometimes people make up stories, but let me tell you the truth. The truth is that sometimes newspapers get it wrong too. Let me tell you a little story. There's a time when I was but a wee lad. I was a kid, and I had gone to some event somewhere, and the press happened to be there. I was with my mother, and they were obviously talking to children or whatever, and they decided they would talk with me. Right now, I vaguely remember this thing, talking with them, and they probably taking my picture or whatever. Anyway, it came out in the newspapers. I was in the newspapers, right? As you know, one of those caption pictures, like you're at an event. And in the caption, they said I wanted to be a pilot. I never tell the people that. I never say I want to be no pilot. My mother was there. I never say that. I just make up a caption. And it's not the first time. Somehow when I am paying papers, the caption is always wrong. But I can understand that for some more important articles, like in business, things in finance, things in government, you have to be very accurate. It was some small man who, was at some little event and you put the wrong caption, and I'm going to ask them to print a retraction for that. But if it's something big, then the institutional authority and the trust is still very much there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I think that is I think that for newspapers they can survive, but they definitely have to change the way they interface with people.
Yeah, I think they're moving into a very interesting time, particularly in Trinidad and Tobago. We might have lagged a little bit, which gave them some life, because we tend to lag more international markets, which gave them some life, an extra 10 years, I think. And this is not to bash the local newspapers, but I think they move into digital because you have to think about what you're selling. Traditional media is selling truth. New media is selling speed. And I think when they moved into the digital, they didn't consider that whole truth aspect. And there are other business decisions that I wouldn't have made, like gating stuff, because to me, a business model should be advertising. But that's a different discussion. But I think they have opportunity still to build the brand and continue to build the brand and leverage that built brand and leverage that trust into new forms of content and apply that authority to new forms of content. Because for sure, I would give more trust to something branded Express or something branded TV6 or something branded Guardian way over something branded. I'm not going to call any TikTok guys, but...
Or even Facebook.
Just insert your favorite TikToker right in that space right there, and you'll get the point that I'm making. Now, over time, you build trust, but you still don't really know these guys. A lot of times it's a voice only. Sometimes it's a voice and a talking head. And there's no physical location that you could turn up to demand a retraction. The only thing you could do is put yourself on social media and address them. So I think there's opportunity there. There definitely needs to be flexibility. There definitely needs to be changes taking place, but I don't think is the absolute death knell on traditional print media.
Right. Yeah. All right. So what did we learn today?
Well, if we start from the back or forward, I think one of the things we learned about print is that it's not dead. They need to talk to the right target audience. They need to explore niches and unique opportunities. There seems to be some growth happening across the world in niche publications, hyperlocal publications. And there needs to be innovation and leveraging of the built-in trust and authority that is in traditional press and print media.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'm being someone who comes from a print background. I like print. I still like the smell of the paper and the ink. I mean, if for that only, if you've ever been inside of a printing press room, it's something, it's almost magical, if you understand what I'm saying, to seeing plain white paper turn into a printed image in real time is almost magical. For those who are listening, if you never had a chance to experience that, like get a tour of the government printery or get a tour of it's really, really nice. And this is from somebody who has a print background. So I agree with that.
We come from that background with print. I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah. It's something different. It's, just thinking about it making me want to go and visit Scriptgy or one of those guys, and let's see. I think Jason Freakley the CEO there still? I'm not sure. Somebody's CEO there. And what else did we learn? We learned that CEOs also have an issue of trust to address, and that they can build trust as well by putting out content. And the idea of CEOs being able to talk to their audience, their fans, their stakeholders directly is something that can be very, very, very beneficial. So I am all for CEOs making content, and I think they should. Obviously, not every business will be able to, it will be necessary, well, not necessary, that's not the word I want to use. It will be easy to figure out how to do it, but I think a CEO having the facility of being able to talk to the people directly is something that they should take advantage of and make content. Yeah. All right. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we see you again soon on It's Good to Relate.
Yes. Thank you for everyone. Be safe. See you all next episode.